I just want to say thanks to the Real Democracy Movement organising tonight's event, and also can I also say for the online course that they've done as well. So thanks for that. And I urge people to have a look at the Real Democracy Movement's website to have a look at the course, because I think actually it really does set the backdrop to a lot of the discussions that we've been having. I just want to just set the scene really. Because I think tonight's discussion couldn't be more timely. 10 weeks ago, a new government was elected. It was fairly obvious before the election that with the mounting level of discontent of 14 years of successive Conservative governments, particularly associated with the years of austerity, wage freezes, and public services on their knees, basically, people just wanted rid of the Conservatives. But even so, even with that depth of anger, I suppose, about what's happened over the last 14 years, the election was marked by a continuing decline in many areas of the proportion of people actually voting. 59.7% eligible to vote voted in the last election. That was on the stats I was looking at, that was a 7.8% drop in voter turnout since the last election in 2019. And the Labour government under Keir Starmer was elected by only 34% of those voting. If you take into account all those who were able to vote, only 1 in 5 actually voted for this government. So the election has called into question the validity of the electoral system, but also the authority of the mandate the government can claim. And the question of the validity of the mandate, I think, has become even more contested because of the introduction of the policies in the first 10 weeks of this new government. As the owner said, things that were not included or even mentioned in Labour's manifesto or in policy statements, and that includes the contentious issue of the maintenance of the two-child cap on benefits and the withdrawal from millions of pensioners of the winter fuel allowance. And I have to say, alongside this, alongside the policy concerns, has been the revelations of the scale of gifts and donations to senior politicians from rich individuals who are associated with different sectors of our economy. And of course, the questions are being asked about whether this provides a mechanism for influencing government policy making. It reminds me of, and some of you will remember, the book by Greg Palast way back, I think it was 2003. The book was entitled The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. So I think opening the debate again about our democratic system now is really opportune. The recent experience of our democratic process, it's really opened up the whole question of the nature of our democracy. But I think more importantly, people looking at what alternatives that there could be. And I think it goes beyond just the discussion about electoral reform. I think it's much more about the whole system and how people can be not just represented, but how they can be participants. So I think it's where the debate on citizen assemblies can be renewed now with an intensity that we haven't seen for a period. And the debate we need to engender now is how do we design and bring about participative democracy, where decision making is not simply a vote every few years, as we say, but where decisions also are not left in the hands of a few representatives with very little accountability. We were asked when we were invited to speak on the panel to give some of our own experiences, and I'll be brief because I know everyone's got a limited time to speak. I want to talk about my experience at the GLC. The GLC, Greater London Council in the 1980s, some of you will remember what it was for many of us. It was an experiment with that theory of in and against the state. This is a theory where we recognize that the state is, yes, a set of institutions, but it isn't just a set of institutions. It's a relationship between the institutions and the individual citizen. And it is a relationship largely of dominance. So our aim was to go inside the state, either through elected office or serving as an official or participating in the various structures and as individual citizens, to transform that relationship into one where the citizens were in control and not the bureaucracy. And we did so literally by opening up. Some of you will recall Paul's with us. Paul Feldman's with us. He was there when this was happening. We literally opened up County Hall to anyone who wanted to meet and discuss and develop the policies that were needed to tackle the issues they felt to improve the quality of life in our city. And what was staggering, people turned up in their numbers. Every committee room and chamber, night after night, was packed with groups coming together to raise concerns, but more importantly, actually to discuss solutions. And it was an effervescence of creativity. And we were dealing with everything was discussed, from London transport, of course, and housing and policing, but also the range of equality struggles, in early debates around environment, and the early debates in the early 80s about climate change even coming onto the agenda. And what we did to nourish that is that we provided funding to those groups that came together so that they could adequately resourced to build and progress their ideas. And in some instances, many of the groups who may not have actually agreed with some of the issues that we were raising as the Labour group on the GLC, and actually opposed some of those, but it was to give them a voice to enable them to do that. And we co-opted people into formal committees, of course, and we put them on boards. The Board of London Transport. We put an anarchist on the Board of London Transport, someone who knew virtually every bus route in London and knew exactly what it was like, the traveller experience, and what needed to be done. It was that sort of creativity that people had within them that could transform people's lives within London. Policy conferences were held, massive conversations were launched, policy papers produced, and they didn't just sit on the shelves, they actually became the policy programs implemented by the GLC. And the result, looking back on it now, and I try not to romanticize about it, but I think it's true, it was an immensely popular administration. And it was one which was based upon the very concept of citizens' assemblies, where people have their say, but more importantly, they see the implementation of the ideas that they've developed. And interestingly enough, we built consensus across a whole range of issues, right the way across communities. There was obviously some opposition came up, particularly around our fares fare policy when we reduced fares. But even then, when we were lost in the courts, we came back again with more creative ideas that people had developed themselves. So it was a surge of creativity, unleashing, I think, the capacity of a whole group of citizens right the way across London. It was so successful. Yeah, it's true. It was so successful that Mrs. Thatcher saw it as a real challenge to the sort of neoliberal hegemony that she was developing. And all that she could do was not reform, but abolish us. But it left, I think, a residual memory of what could be done. And I think some of the lessons that could be learned from how it can go about. And I know we've got Jamie Driscoll with us this evening as well. Jamie was the embodiment of some of these ideas put into practice when he was mayor. So the lesson for me is participatory democracy works, but yes, it will be seen as a threat to existing power, and therefore it has to be fought for, argued for, and mobilized for. And I just say this, the current dismay at the sort of post-election politics that we're witnessing at the moment opens up the opportunity for us to argue for something better and to, I think, enhance that whole concept of participatory democracy that we've argued for through citizens' assemblies and other structures. So I'm increasingly optimistic that we can catch the wind with this argument in this current period. My worry is if we don't, increasingly disillusionment will set in with our existing forms of democracy, and that feeds into the far right. So this is a huge challenge, I think, that we have to take up.